Stop doing these stretches and exercises if you're dealing with sciatica leg pain. If you're one of the 40% of Americans who are dealing with sciatica at some point in their life, doing these exercises at that time could be making things a lot worse. I see people all the time who are doing the wrong exercises, the wrong stretches, and the wrong movements for their sciatica, but not anymore. Let's solve that today. In this video, we're going to cover modifications for those stretches and exercises if you're currently dealing with sciatica. Stay tuned to the very end. I'm going to show you my very favorite sciatica relief position that you may not already know. Remember, these exercises are currently not good because sciatica may be active. Understanding the mechanics of sciatica, stretch and slackening mechanics, can be very helpful to identifying how to modify exercises and stretches even on your own. So I don't want to scare anyone out of doing anything forever because these are things that should not be done right now, but later on you possibly can. That comes down to the exam to find that out. So this is a representation of my sciatic nerve here, and the sciatic nerve comes from the lower back. It goes into the hip area, or right around, you guys have heard of piriformis, right there, the muscle, and it goes down into the hamstrings. It splits the difference between them, goes deep into the calf, the bottom of the foot, actually goes to the bottom of the toes. And so when we incorporate a forward bend movement plus knee extension plus toes up, it actually tightens the nerve more than anything else. You can see it tightened here like kind of like a bowstring, right? So when I do this, it tightens it, but notice when I make a slight modification, such as a knee bend, it slackens it, right? It's way slackened here. And if I let my heel up, it slackens it even more. Now, when we're doing this, we can make modifications in many different exercises just by adding those slight changes. But what we don't want when sciatica is currently active, because pressure happens somewhere, it typically, not all the time, makes it intolerant to stretch. And that's why things like flossing exercises tend to help it, okay? But not always. This is just per case dependent. But ideally, if these types of exercises bother you now, you should modify them now and then start to add them back in later when things are better. Let's get to those modifications. Remember, at the very end, I'm going to show you one of my favorite positions to reduce some of the sciatica pain that we see here at Performance Place. So the first one that we're going to change is going to be this long sit position. This is a stretch that a lot of people do to relieve their hamstring tension associated to sciatica. And a lot of times the hamstring tension is actually protective, trying to get you not to do this. But it does provide a little bit of pain relief, as most people kind of know, but a lot of times people actually feel worse doing this. So the modification is going to be a hamstring stretch on the back. While you're on your back anyways. And this is going to be toes pointed to the ceiling, because we know that if the toes are pointed away from you, it decreases tension on the sciatic nerve. And we know if the low back is flat, it also decreases tension too. So this isolates the stretch more locally to the actual hamstrings versus the nerve itself. And surprisingly, stretching the other side helps out to floss the nerve across the lumbar spine canal. So it can be very therapeutically valuable in the early stages. Now, the next thing we're going to modify is V-ups. The V-up is probably one of the most abused exercises, in my opinion, for sciatica. Notice my knees are relatively straight. The toes are kind of pointed away, which helps out a little bit. But the purpose of the exercise that people are doing is they're trying to strengthen their abs because they've been told strengthen their abs can help out with their sciatica or their leg pain, which isn't necessarily incorrect, but there's other ways to accomplish it to get it done with less aggravation in the process. A lot of times people's hip flexors become involved as well, which is a compensation for poor core stability too. So I don't discount the value of a very simple exercise called a plank. The plank works for most people. The older you are, if you have lumbar stenosis, it may not fare super well, but it's a good one for most people, probably under the age of 60 or so. I like to do elbow and knee-based ones. I know people go from the feet and the hands, but that's a little bit hard for a lot of people, and they end up sagging into the low back, just like so, which can aggravate symptoms as well. And so being in this position for a lot of people, we actually find that they're not symptomatic in this position, and they start to push themselves away into what we call a plank, because you're forming a straight line or a plank of wood from your head to your shoulders to your hips to your, well, in this case, not the feet. So we're really flanking from the hips and shoulders. In this position, you have to make sure that you're not actually sagging either, or the butt up presentation. But some of you actually may find more aggravation as you actually start to round your back if you go a little bit higher. Some people, this fares a lot better, right? But what we know from at least a mechanical perspective is when we're going like this, the knees are bent. If you look at the feet, they're flared down too. And also it's not into a high hip flex position like so, which tend to aggravate it because it duplicates toe touching. And if you look at this boat pose or this V up here, if you take me and you flip me around this way and have me do it straight down, this is the same position. And this is what bothers most people. So doing a lot of planks to get ab activation can be very helpful. If the purpose of boat pose is to get ab activation to help the sciatica, maybe we find a different exercise that's mechanically more acceptable for what the sciatica tolerates. And so a plank from the knees and elbows is usually pretty acceptable for most people. Now the last modification we're gonna make before we actually get to the super secret position that reduces sciatica for a lot of people is the RDL. Okay, and so I showed already that the stiff-legged versions don't work for a lot of people. So straight knee and then bending down with or without lumbar spine or low back round, it seems like it doesn't really work super well for a lot of people because it breaks those mechanics that we talked about earlier. So one thing we can possibly do is make it a more hip dominant pattern. If you struggle with doing that, you can pattern an exercise with something like a band like so prior to doing the weight, because there's no point in doing the weight if you don't have the pattern right. So you can do the patterning just a little bit prior by letting the band win and standing, letting the band win and standing. And notice how my hips are sliding back like I'm pushing a garage door shut or a car door shut with my butt. Notice how much knee bend I have, right? So this is generally pretty safe on people with a lot of versions of sciatica or severities. And then when I do it with the weight, it's basically just like so. Now this is pretty low for me still. I may choose to elevate it a little bit up so I'm not quite so down here with hamstring stretchy if I really had really active sciatica. But overall, this can be dosed pretty heavy and the weight can actually go pretty high up and actually be very therapeutically valuable and helpful to build strength of the glutes, to take work away from the back and the sciatic nerve. Okay, so now we're into our super secret position that makes most people with sciatica feel a lot better. You may have seen this, but I have a slight variant on it, which makes it our secret. We're gonna need a chair. We're gonna need it so you can actually slide your hand underneath it so a couch or a bed doesn't always work super well. And so we're gonna slide ourselves down on the ground here as slow as you can and eventually get into the position where your feet are up and really nicely supported. This chair here that we have in the office at Performance Place, actually it really only has this purpose because it has a nice backing to it. It doesn't slide around like a roller desk and we can slide our hips underneath it. We can't do that for all of them. So in this position, because it doesn't defy those mechanics that we talked about before, the knees are bent, the toes have room to kind of move if they want to, and the back's generally flat. This is like an offloading position for the sciatic nerve. It like lets it slacken. And especially if you let your knees kind of flop out, it even helps even more. So in this position, you kind of rest and see, and if symptoms start to work themselves up your leg and they start to go away, money, this is great. But the cool thing is now we can modify. Ooh. So some people actually feel better as their knees come more to their shoulders. Some don't. Some actually feel better as you slide it away. But the cool thing is, since you can slide yourself in and out of the chair, you essentially can modify that a little bit. Now, if this is the position that made me feel better, I'd probably take a towel here and then get it underneath my, kind of like my tailbone area, not my low back, not my sacrum, but like my tailbone. And you can see it kind of popped out there, right? Like it's not very far. And then I kind of let that settle there. And I would just be in this position for literally minutes. I remember one gentleman I worked with, he said he fell asleep in this position because it felt so good. And he started resolving really quickly after that. So this is called our hook line 90-90 position. It works for many, many people, but not everybody. So let's go through that Rolodex of other things that tend to work well too. First, we have child's pose. Sit there and take some breaths and relax. Hip internal rotation stretch. Hip external rotation stretch. Cat-cow. Foam rolling the side of the hip. Bird dogs. Side planks.